The film is set in 1981, and one of our key characters, Rini, is unsuccessfully attempting to eke out some royalty money from her mother's old vinyl albums. Her mother was a well-known singer in the country for a period before she fell ill. Rini became unwell, and as a result, she and the rest of her family slipped into poverty. She arrives home disappointed but puts on a brave face for her grandmother and mother, Bondi, her younger brother, and Ian, who is deaf and thus communicates through sign language. Using sign language, she then goes to meet her jobless father and informs him of her inability to find work. Money from royalties. Rini considers selling the house because the family is running out of money. But the father reminds her that they won't be able to find a buyer quickly enough, so they should search for other options. The two are then interrupted by the sound of a bell ringing, which is rang by the sick mother whenever she needs assistance. Rini goes upstairs to check on her inattentive mother, but she begins shouting and furiously ringing the doorbell as if someone is frightening her. Rini is unmoved and merely removes the bell from her grasp till she calms down. At night, the father listens to one of his wife's albums while waiting for his second son, Toni, to return home, and when he does, the nice youngster tells him that he's selling his motorbike to a neighbor to help the family out. The father then sells the motorbike to a neighbor who is waiting for them at their home. Following that, Toni greets his siblings in the kitchen, and we learn that he's been selling all of his possessions to aid the family. Rini begins lecturing him for it until they are interrupted by yet another bell ring. Toni goes upstairs to check on the mother this time. He gently begins stroking her hair till he notices that it is falling out. Then, Toni attempts to close it to keep the wind out. But when he turns around, the mother is staring at him, prompting him to excuse himself. Rini is awakened by a bell ring later that night after everyone has fallen asleep. She goes to check on the sick mother, but she finds her standing erect, so she approaches her.
Oh?
It turns out that she did not touch her real mother. Thank goodness it's just a nightmare. However, Rini hears the bell ring again, exactly as she did in her dream. She rushes to check on the mother and finds her standing erect, precisely as she did in her dream. She approaches the figure gently, making sure her own mother isn't on the bed. But then she starts freaking out and summons her father, who runs to check for a pulse but finds none. When the remainder of the children realize their mother has died, they barge in and cry in agony. They have a funeral and bury her in a cemetery directly across the street. Right after the funeral, we meet Hendra, the son of a local imam who is attempting to take his shot at the worst possible time for Rini. Being the atheists that they are, the father and Toni are not joining the rest of the men in singing prayers. After the neighborhood men have left, the father declares that now that he is no longer responsible for his sick wife, he is heading to the city to look for work. Despite their initial reservations, they offer him their blessings after the father informs them that they will be homeless if they do not. Later that night, Toni is alone in his room, listening to the radio, when he hears a bell ring. Curiosity drives him to follow the sound, which leads him directly to his parents' bedroom. Toni flees in terror when he sees the flying bell, but he doesn't tell his family about it until the next morning. The father has already left for town, but Toni maintains his calm by giving Bondi a picture viewer toy to cheer him up before heading to school. Rini spends her days doing housework after leaving college for a time since her family couldn't pay her tuition. She goes to the well to get water and wash dishes because the plumbing has suddenly stopped working. She spots a person momentarily emerge in the mirror as she prepares to leave the room but puts it away for the time being. Meanwhile, Bondi is having a good time with his new toy. He keeps flicking between pictures till he drops the doll after seeing a terrifying version of his mother in it. Bondi tries browsing again, but the camera returns to normal. Back to the story. Toni remains awake late that night to listen to his favorite radio show, when the station abruptly changes and begins playing one of his mother's songs. He ignores it and turns it back on, but instead hears the bell ring briefly, followed by his mother's voice shouting for him on the radio. He switches off the radio, only to see his mother standing next to his bed. But she vanishes as he turns on the lights. That same night, Bondi and Ian walk to the toilet together, but when they're going to return to their room, Ian is startled by a picture of their mother on the wall. His older brother goes to get a white cloth to cover it up. The blanket then falls over an invisible individual. as the figure begins chasing them. The two boys scream and tell Rini that they saw a ghost, but Rini dismisses it, telling them that it was just a nightmare. Meanwhile, Grandma sits in her chamber and writes a letter, unconcerned by the noise downstairs. The next morning, Toni, who has been traumatized by the bell ring, decides to bury the mother's bell in her grave, while Rini goes on a walk with Hendra, the imam's son, not far from the house. He explains here that he has a sixth sense and that during his mother's funeral, he saw a weird apparition that could be a ghost. He recently saw the ghost again while he passed by their house and is convinced that the ghost is an evil spirit disguised as their late mother. As a result, he offers the family refuge at his home, but Rini remains skeptical and respectfully declines. The grandmother may be seen fleeing in the background. The grandma then abruptly comes to a stop and gets to her feet, appearing to be caught. Bondi, who just got home from school, arrives home shortly after Rini. To Rini's horror, she learns that their grandma has fallen into the well and drowned to death as she rushes to Bondi's rescue as he runs to use the loo. They perform a decent funeral for her, but Bondi, who will presumably always be disfigured, appears to be ill. Rini goes to the grandmother's chamber to organize her possessions after seeing to her ailing brother's needs. Instead, she discovers an unopened letter addressed to Budeman. She goes to Hendra out of curiosity and asks him to accompany her to the city so she can meet the man. They go to the location listed on the letter, and they ask Budeman to tell them what he knows since, according to the letter, the grandma begged Budeman to assist the family, albeit she didn't say how. Here, Budeman introduces himself as the grandmother's longtime friend and starts telling Rini a lot about her family history, notably about how the grandmother and the mother had a tense relationship for a long time because the mother couldn't conceive for years. Rini and her siblings entered the world when the mother's ability to conceive children suddenly improved. Since then, the grandmother and the mother have reconciled. However, during the past 2 years, as the grandmother saw the mother develop an unexplainable illness, she has grown suspicious that the mother may have struck a pact with the devil to enable her to become pregnant. Rini, who is always skeptic, finds this hard to accept, but Budeman urges her to retain an open mind and gives her a magazine article he wrote. He menacingly informs Rini that no member of the family can be removed as long as they are in love with one another. Something is not right with Bondi, as can be seen when Rini returns home, as he never stops staring Ian down. Bondi signs to Ian in his sleep that he wants Ian to die after the two boys have gone to bed that night. Naturally, the young Ian is terrified and attempts to sleep it off. And yet, before making his way back to his own bed, Bondi sleep strolls over to Ian. Soon after, Ian needs to use the loo but changes his mind before going, when he encounters the ghost of his grandmother inside. He then makes an attempt to flee but is stopped by something. When Rini first notices something strange about her mother's record in the morning, she tries to play it backwards and unsettlingly learns that it is a tape of a cult praising the devil. When she discovers that young Ian is not in his bed, she becomes even more alarmed. She searches the home for him but only finds him hiding under a chest outside. Rini replies that she hasn't read the magazine article when Toni approaches her with it after giving it to her from Budeman. He starts by explaining to her that the story in the newspaper is about a woman who, after 10 years of desiring a child, was eventually able to conceive after joining a certain cult. Toni then notes that there is a 6-year age difference between each of the children in this family and speculates that perhaps their mother made a deal with the cult but was unable to sacrifice any of them. So she continued to have children until the cult most likely became impatient and caused her to become ill. According to this report, their mother wasn't carrying the children for their father, but rather was impregnated by several followers of a demonic organization. Given that their siblings all have drastically different looks, Toni speculates that this may be connected to them. He also remembers how their mother used to host gatherings when she was still a well-known singer, and a strange crowd would usually show up. If what is claimed in the story is accurate, Ian is in danger because his 7th birthday is coming up soon. The youngster will be taken up by the Walking Dead, Toni says as he wraps up his explanation, which makes Rini laugh because of how absurd it sounds. But despite her skepticism, Rini soon witnesses what appears to be the ghost of her deceased grandmother while making lunch for Ian. She makes the decision to ask the local imam to offer prayers for the location. At the conclusion of his visit, he advises them to begin praying to ward off bad spirits. When the mother suddenly materializes in front of Rini that very night, she screams and tries to remove her prayer clothing, but it won't come off, and instead, the evil entity begins crawling inside. If you thought that was going to be the end of it, well, it's not. Grandma is discovered by Ian, who is trying to sleep when she is standing over Bondi. The siblings, who are now terrified to death, go to the imam's home for safety. The two oldest siblings talk about their options the following morning. The conversation is cut short when Budaman, the grandmother's friend, calls and asks Hendra to head over to his house right away because he has something crucial to show them. Hendra is sent out by Budaman with a letter for Rini and the family when he gets at his home. Back at the imam's home, Bondi is shown threatening to kill Ian with a knife while appearing to be possessed. And unaware, Rini stops him and removes the knife from him. When Hendra leaves Budaman's house, we watch Budaman bracing himself for a knock on the door. In the meantime, Hendra is involved in a horrific accident that quickly kills him, conveniently. The note falls out of his pocket as they take his body back to his house, catching Rini's eye. When Rini spots a man who like the imam's son standing outside in the woods, they stop mourning and attend a funeral for him that afternoon. But suddenly, she starts to be pulled by an unknown force until her brother steps in to save her. The imam observes things happening but says nothing. When Toni and Rini finally manage to free themselves from the figure's hold, they grab their brothers and run for the door just as the father shows up and envelops them in his arms, telling them that he had heard they had been staying there from the neighbors. The father informs them as they return home that they just need to remain here for one more night since he has found them a new place to reside. After everything that has happened, the father is not so easily off the hook. Rini confronts him about what she saw him say to mother the night she passed away. But instead of responding, the father slyly tells her that all that matters to him is his love for his children. Ian, meantime, begs Toni to go with him to the loo. But Toni starts screaming for assistance from below as Ian finds himself unexpectedly confined within the room. As Ian is being pulled into the well, his father tries to save him. Without further ado, the father jumps into the water to rescue the young child, and the two siblings assist in helping him stand back up. Unbeknownst to them, a menacing figure emerges from the well's base. They lock all doors after seeing a bunch of ominous-looking people approach the house as they are about to leave the bathroom. These individuals are, of course, none other than cult members. The three are abruptly attacked by Grandma's ancient wheelchair and the dining chair, which compels them to flee and hide in another room. Sadly, the door closes and separates them from Bondi and Ian. While Ian clings to the doorframe and Bondi hides behind a pillar, Grandma's spirit seems to be trying to pull Ian back into the well. Unexpectedly, Ian then begins yelling Bondi's name. Bondi, who has repeatedly attempted to kill Ian, ultimately decides to protect his younger sibling. The family embraces one another in relief as the chaos abruptly comes to an end. Toni drags the father back inside after he checks on his kids and goes outside in the rain to mock the cult members and declare that he would never allow them to kidnap his kids. The cult members follow his instructions for some reason. They go, but not before dispersing what appear to be seeds in perfect unison. The family appears to be doing fine the following morning as they pack up their belongings and wait for the movers to pick them up. Even the local imam comes by to say goodbye and regrets not assisting Rini sooner because he is still in mourning for his deceased son. Rini goes outside to breathe some fresh air while the father converses with the imam and discovers a scattering of crimson seeds on the ground. She decides to keep some out of fascination. To everyone's confusion, night falls but the movers are still nowhere to be seen. And then there is a countrywide blackout, so the imam spends the night with the family to keep them safe. The siblings get ready for bed since they are sick of waiting, but Rini finds it difficult to sleep and decides to read the most recent letter Budaman sent. She reads it and wakes Toni to share her conclusions. Budaman just realized that he had written something incorrectly when he said that the family's final child wouldn't be abducted by the cult. Instead, the youngster is the devil in human form, who will come into his own on the night of his 7th birthday. Because she just wanted to keep the family safe from Ian, Grandma's ghost only misbehaved and tried to kill Ian, leaving the rest of the family alone. The moment Rini finished speaking, they heard a bell ring and turned to see their deceased mother walking up the stairs and into her bedroom. On the other side of the home, Bondi awakens to see Ian talking to himself and eloquently stating that his pals are outside before strutting out of the room and laughing uncontrollably. While the dead bodies enter the room, Bondi hides beneath the bed while he glances bewilderedly out the window and sees 2 dead bodies in shrouds standing upright. Back in the living room, the imam awakens to discover his deceased son wandering alongside other recently resurrected dead persons. The father wakes up to discover his deceased wife lying next to him, and he is the next to realize what is happening. He hurriedly grabs his 2 eldest children and makes his way out of the room, but when they get downstairs, They come across the imam who has had his throat cut and is dying. The father is still astonished that his youngest son could possibly do this despite Rini's cautions. He rushes outside to get Ian but notices the young lad is acting unsettlingly devilish. His army of the dead made him chuckle. The dead army rushes back inside as they attempt to escape as they immediately enter. The family rushes and closes a different entrance after locking the side door, but the dead army manages to get inside.
Door.
But this time, it appears that the ghost of the grandmother is attempting to hold the door with all of her might. Just in time, Budeman steps in to save the day, and they scramble into a car before rejoicingly leaving Ian behind. The final scene takes place 1 year later and depicts the family residing in a modest flat where their neighbor has just graciously shared some home-cooked food. But unexpectedly, we discover that the neighbor may be a member of the cult as she escapes inside her own flat since it is stocked with the red seeds from the previous scene. The neighbor's lover begs the family to stay put, hinting at the gloomy experiences Rini's family will go through. The movie concludes with the cult woman oddly dancing with her guy, and the family's story is continued in the recently released sequel, Satan's Slaves 2.